Old World Order is the latest film by Sean Hibbeler. And it's the latest rendition or iteration of the Tartaria conspiracy theory, or the Tartarian hypothesis. The general gist of the Tartaria hypothesis is that it was impossible for those in the past to build all the great historical architecture we see all across the world and in old photographs, and that these structures are actually the result of a different, more advanced civilization that has been erased and covered up. The hypothesis argues that most, if not all, of history is fake, and that those in the past had advanced technology. In Hibbeler's film, this civilization is one of giants. Now, before we begin, I just want to say a big thank you to Dusty for hosting this on his channel, and I want to start before the release of the film with stewpeters. stewpeters is down as presenting this film, and I'm not actually sure what that entails and what that means. In my opinion, and from my understanding, it's just that he's hosting it on his platform to his audience. But before the release of this film, he was making claims that this is going to be the most censored film of 2024. And then also, when it came to release date, which was May 25th, the whole thing got delayed and there were attacks on his servers, allegedly. So what I want to do is just open it up to Wooden Nichols and Dusty and talk a little bit about stewpeters' involvement in this film. What do you guys think?
Well, to my understanding of it, Sean Hibbeler had put together a GoFundMe and it just was not reaching its target. And stewpeters stepped in, financed the rest of the movie, and that's what gets his name and Goldco, which seems to be the company that's helping to finance the most censored film of 2024, which just so happens to be Sean Hannity's and Chuck Norris's #1 choice in precious metal investing. So if I was to give any credibility to there being an attack on stewpeters' website, I would have to assume that that's coming from the inside of his camp, because I know that he's in lawsuits with other creatives that he's worked with regarding the film Died Suddenly. Otherwise, there's no alphabet agency trying to shut this down. I just found that to be really entertaining, that was the route that they wanted to claim that they're under attack and the film missed its release date.
So do you think that they was just trying to hype it up? Or do you think that they were doing some edits like we were talking about with, just getting right into it, the Detroit Publishing Company? You think it was an attempt to hype it up a little bit more?
I don't believe so, no. I think it was just a lie. I think it worked in that favor to try to do that, but I'm not sure why, but I feel pretty confident saying that they were lying, that there was an attack. But that's just my opinion.
I mean, it's definitely not being censored, and there's no real reason why it would be censored because it's all over YouTube and TikTok. I mean, the Bully Slayer, who's one of the sort of leading figures of this hypothesis, he gets over millions of views on TikTok. JonLevi has literally, week in, week out, every week he releases on this, and he gets hundreds of thousands of views. So I can't see a situation where someone wants to attack the servers to stop this coming out, or even a situation where, before the release of the film, that stewpeters can be confident in saying, this is the most censored film of 2024. It's basically a marketing technique, and it's also just a lie. And at this point, it kind of feels like it's almost like parody in a way. Okay, that's great. So let's move on. Before we actually talk about the film itself, let's move on to the cast. So one thing that I noticed is, where are the OGs of Tartaria? Where's JonLevi? Where's a whole host of people that were there from the beginning? What did you guys feel about that? Was the cast right? Where were the OGs?
Well, you said it before, and one of you guys said it before in our chats, like, or the little group DM, that my lunch break was kind of fast tracked through it all, right? He kind of came up from behind and lapped everybody, probably because the algorithms are pushing that Tartaria narrative. But to your point, yeah, where was JonLevi and the other OGs that are from Eastern camp, if you will, because John pulled a lot of us into this stuff originally a long time ago. So did a few other ones, namely NewEarth, Sylvie, Global Vision, and Philipp Druzhinin, who I've had a couple of videos with. So those were, like, as you say, the pioneers. And there was no mention of that. And to be honest, the word Tartaria was only mentioned once, if I'm correct, by Max Egan. So I did think that was kind of weird.
Well, and let's not forget our old good friend Jerry DeCamp. He didn't get any credit for his meltology making the film. I think it was very wise of individuals, if they were invited, to not accept said invite. It just seems like once Stu Peters got involved, it really got weird quick in my eyes. Again, going back to this being the most censored film, but you've got these bizarre companies starting to fund these movies. Ultimately, it does kind of feel like it has an agenda to tie itself to the conservative movement and to ultimately make them look pretty foolish. However, as of this morning, which we're recording this on Friday, May 31st, I did do a quick check of the internet with Stu Peters' name. Nothing in the news yet reporting back on this latest conspiracy hype from this group. So I'm very curious to see if the left is finally going to start attacking what AEWAR and I have suggested is its own baby that it's created, or if it's going to stay silent and continue to let it fester and grow.
Speaking of silent, this just makes my mind go towards, we're all familiar with the term the silent money person, and I just wonder if Stu represents that. He's not the silent partner, so to speak, because he's out there in the media and everything, and he has his network, but is he being marionetted, puppet string by that silent money partner type of deal? For speaking to what you just outlined, Woody, it makes me think that, just pure speculation.
I think with Stu Peters, I think where he kind of comes into this is he's going to take it to a wider, broader audience, and he's a lot more sort of famous than the cast, which then I suppose kind of highlights, what's the purpose of this film? Because I was kind of expecting it to be a new iteration or rendition of the Tartaria hypothesis, but it isn't actually that. It's more of a kind of 101 introduction to it. It seems like they want to take it to a higher level. And I suppose that kind of brings me to the next point I had here is that, did the film do anything new? And I don't think it did. But one thing it did do that's new, that we're not really used to, is to see this subject presented in such a way. So this really, its aesthetic, its vision was very much rooted in the kind of documentary genre. Hibbeler didn't really do that much. He was kind of the narrator in that sense. Obviously, he did a lot in terms of the production. He did it all. But he didn't really speak that much. It was more about, you've got this cast on board who are supposed to be kind of truther experts. It's the band of truthers. And they're trying to tell a story. And I think that was the first point with this film that kind of failed for me. Because the way that I came to this subject was through JonLevi. And I think a lot of people did as well. And the reason that JonLevi was so successful in bringing in so many people to this topic was his aesthetic and his vision. With John, I've described it before, he's like a voice calling out from the wilderness of modernity. And he's looking back nostalgically at our past. And he's got that aesthetic done, perfectly, and all the music, and it's all very nice. It's really bloody effective. And the second one that's really bloody effective of this kind of iteration of this hypothesis is Marcel Rameau's Ether. That's not the same as JonLevi's kind of old world nostalgic aesthetic, but that's very powerful in its sci-fi vision. And those two people were a massive influence to me and my series, The Lost History of Flat Earth. That's completely derivative of those two. But those two are very powerful at drawing new people in. Because it's a story, JonLevi, it's the weekly kind of vlog, And Marcel Rameau, it's a film, it's a big vision. But there's something so powerful in both of those. Whereas with this, the kind of pseudo documentary style of people standing there and being interviewed, I found completely ineffective. I imagine myself as not knowing anything about this topic and coming to it for a first time and thinking, I don't think this would sell it to me. I don't think I would have gone down the route I did if this was how I was introduced to Tartaria. You know, I guess the question I want to ask you both is that for you guys, do you think the film did anything new? And was that format effective?
No, I don't think it did anything new. As a matter of fact, one component that was absent from it was a surprise to me in how they kind of just brushed off the mud flood. I already mentioned how they only said Tartaria once, and it's just all being called the old world or the previous or past civilization. But how the mud flood was brushed over was interesting to me when they were interviewing the security guards and the worker of that building. How I think my lunch break put it was, do you think that they just put the mud there to make it look like the building didn't go any deeper? That kind of was like a curveball because they didn't mention mud flood whatsoever at all, other than that. So adding anything new as far as like the research that we've been entrenched in for the past few years, no. It was more of a 101, nothing new, more of the same. You know, not to be too critical, but it's what we're doing here professionally. It was kind of a flop, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Nothing new. And as AEWAR has kind of pointed out in just of our side chats, is it was very incoherent. It wasn't weaved together well. They'd be like, well, let's start you at this time frame. Let's have this middle, and then we'll have an end that just ties it all together. I mean, you could say that it's kind of there, but yeah, as AEWAR was saying, if you're an outsider watching that for the first time, I don't see how any of that movie really made sense to go from, well, giants built all the architecture in America from the Victorian age and earlier to then blimps. But as we saw in the movie, the people have to duck walking in and out of the blimps. So where does that stand? Did the giants create the blimps and we just miniaturize them? Yeah, it just a lot of hosh posh, I guess, as they say.
Yeah, I agree. I think the film, I think it amplifies two of the main problems with the Tartaria hypothesis in general. And that's the first one, like you said, Wooden, is there's, you know, it's complete lack of cohesion here. Like, there is no golden thread that ties any of these topics together. And some of these topics individually are actually very interesting, but there is no golden thread and there's no overarching argument or thesis. There's actually no storyline in this movie. It's a movie that kind of actually starts to tell a story and then just gets lost in its own tangents. I think that problem's part and parcel because, you know, it works to have like a lack of coherency in a format like your weekly JonLevi releases. Because John, again, is just musing each week, isn't he, in a, like a vlog-like format. But when you actually try and put that into a coherent piece of work, it's very difficult. And that's part and parcel because this thing is a bit of a grift, you know, and content creators do need to keep pumping out consistent content, you know, for monetization. So when you have an overarching thesis or argument, that can make it very hard to keep content flowing. But I think another thing that this really suffered with and that was completely amplified in this film, again, is the cherry picking. And this is something that we've all been banging on about now for like a couple of years. It's the kind of Achilles heel, the weakness of the Tartaria hypothesis. You know, we've spoken at length, we've released videos on it. You know, you can't just cherry pick and say that the construction photographs of our ancestors building all these structures are fake. But then, you know, in the next frame, be talking about the Great Chicago Fire and looking at the photographs of the aftermath of that destruction and treating them as if they're real. How do you know that those photographs are real if the construction photographs are fake? Why are the fire photographs real? If all of history or his story or whatever you call it is a lie, then why are we reading narratives of these fires to begin with? How do you know they're real? And that's really the weakness here, is that you've got pictures of giants, or basically very big people with giganticism from the 19th century. But why are they more legitimate when we know that the Victorians had a kind of old world Photoshop? Why are these photographs treated as legitimate, but the ones that work against your ideas and your arguments are treated as fake? And that is just a glaring weakness to the point where it's not even no one in the film tries to resolve that. What do you think? Did we see a lot of cherry picking in this film?
Oh, absolutely. In my opinion, yeah. And that's the whole name of the grift, is to cherry pick. And when we watch this, we apply the willing suspension of disbelief because we're familiar with it. But to put yourself in the shoes like you did, you were of like someone who's not seen this before, not aware of it. Speaking on the Giants, I believe it was one of them that said, maybe lunch break, said, where did they go? Did they go to the outer lands or different lands? When you say something like that, the savvy critic is going to be like, what are you talking about, outer lands? We have the base of being like, oh yeah, Noskafundin, the outer lands, possibly, could it be? But if someone who's watching it cold and you hear someone just say that in passing and not give a little bit more context, at least to say, hey, maybe there's some extra lands in this realm or this world that we don't know about, that was just completely glossed over. So cherry picking at the very least, and then not providing backup context to support some of these outlandish ideas. Like I said, we had this foundation of that. We knew that, even though we're applying a little bit of the willing suspension of disbelief, right? But picture someone cold listening to it for the first time. You want to say it's 101. How are you going to mention something like the outer lands and not at least give some type of context?
That's funny. I'm glad I was muted because I was laughing at that part, Dusty. That's a really good point. Yeah, the whole entire visual narration of that film was guided with pictures. And you have that concept in the movie that all these photos could be fake, but so many of the photos that were used to guide the movie along, they actually did look manipulated, handfuls of them, and those weren't highlighted or pointed out as, well, this looks like it's been edited or altered, but you could see that many of them were. And then I just want to know about the little people, like I feel like they got excluded from this one, because if we're going to talk about giants and giantitis or whatever that symptom's called, you also have the exact opposite spectrum. You have really tiny people. So why did they get left out of this movie? I want to know where they fit in with Tartaria. Let's be inclusive here, guys.
They're the ones that made all the little bricks that's beyond the facades.
That made sense real quick. Yeah, that's how those buildings had small bricks. Thank you.
Lilliput Tartaria.
Yeah, I mean, the cherry picking was insane. I mean, again, just to beat a dead horse on that, is that, we had newspaper extracts talking about big skeletons found in the ground. And we had, I think there was an account of a fire with objects setting alight spontaneously. But again, this is his story, isn't it? So why are those accounts more legitimate than the hundreds of thousands of countless accounts testifying to the fact that our ancestors did actually build these buildings? All the newspaper accounts of that. It's a problem that the film cannot resolve. It's a problem that none of the Tartaria, however you pronounce it, community can resolve. And it will never be resolved because it's a grift. Also, as well, I mean, trutherism in 2024 is starting to feel quite cringe. It belonged to a certain moment, I think, and that moment came to an end around 2022. But this film, in my opinion, and this is quite harsh of me to say this, but I found it very childish. And I think, I got into Tartaria through JonLevi around 5 years ago or something, before I released my series. And after 5 years, it appeared way more childish than I ever remembered it being, which is kind of odd. But then I suppose you just grow up, don't you, kind of, and mature or whatever. But I think one thing that really bothered me with this film was, on one hand, you've got this documentary style that's trying to be professional and also quite serious. I think the cast are taking themselves seriously. But then on the other hand, you've got this just excessive and consistent use of profanity, swearing and cursing throughout the film. So I think at one point someone's just like, we didn't build this shit. And it's just like, that's completely, there's a dissonance there. It's like, whoa, hold on. Like, why are you all swearing and cursing? It really wasn't necessary. And I think somebody else said, you've got to be fucking stupid to believe this. And at that point, it did just kind of feel like who are the cast? I know who the cast are, obviously, and so do you guys. But I'm coming at this from the first time. Am I listening to, people that want to be taken seriously, or am I listening to like amateur rappers or something? No, like, we didn't build this shit, motherfucker. Like, what? I just couldn't understand that. Like, I understand that Hibbeler was producer, but did he not direct and just say, like, guys, just no profanity, like, clean up your language. We're going for a professional. We want to be taken seriously. So that element of it just felt really childish. And then also at the end, to have this like rap song come on. And this is kind of my problem with Stu Peters being attached to this film in general, is that Stu Peters recently is kind of like stylizing himself as like a white ethno-nationalist. So I'm not even talking about civic nationalism of like America first. He's talking about like, the problems that white people are facing and as a white person, etc. And that's fine. And another one of his crusades is, against kind of the deterioration of our culture now, the sort of degradation, if that's a word, just kind of like the baseness of it all, our culture. But then to have a rap song at the end just felt, again, against his image. But then I find out he's a rapper in general. So I was just confused as to the whole point of this is like, you've got a white ethno-nationalist promoting a film that erases white history and trivializes it. But then he was also a rapper. And then there's a rap song at the end of the film and there's profanity throughout it, but it's supposed to be a professional film. I was completely lost and overwhelmed, and it just felt completely childish in the end. What was your take on the kind of the rap aesthetic of it?
On its face, I would say that it's almost like not necessarily directly doing it purposely, but it's like stoking the dipole, especially with what's going on now. This is what my mind goes to with the race stuff. And if he's promoting white nationalism, like you're saying, but then using the hip hop thing, it's almost like a dipole in of itself, and the energy that's created from that in general. Is that being, like I just said, is that like a subconscious thing that he's doing, or is it purposely being done to stoke the dipole and continue that angst and build it up a little bit more? I don't know, but that did stick out to me too. And the unprofessional nature of it that you point out as well. I try to stay away from swearing and being uncouth on my videos a lot, even in my lives, because you want to be taken seriously. You want to present a professional take on history from a different angle. And it did come off, especially when, like you pointed out again, when one of them said, you got to be stupid if you think that regular sized people did this. It's like, okay, guy, I'm trying to give you some time here. I'm trying to listen to you. And to hear that, it's just off-putting.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that same person is a tattoo artist. If I'm thinking of that same person who was saying that it was stupid. And it's like, yeah, none of those people have ever been go-tos when I was, looking into Tartaria. I never went to any of those people's YouTubes, if they even had them, or websites. Yeah, we always went to JonLevi, Conspiracy RS, those OGs. Going back to what UR was saying about, cringe trutherism in 2024, I always was a proud conspiracy theorist. That's how I would announce myself. I get that the CIA came up with that term to put us down, but then you take those names and you own them and you make them yours. But as of today, I'm officially a recovering conspiracy theorist. I don't believe for a second we went to the moon. I did not, take the jabby jab, even though my job was put on the line and I got fired for my decisions, because we know the mainstream lies to us. And it's very easy at this point to recognize when those lies are happening and how to just kind of step out of the way and avoid it. But with this old world order movie going out and more people becoming familiar with these topics, I don't want to identify as a conspiracy theorist because I don't want to be associated with this particular group anymore. And also, just on a side note, I've gotten a lot of criticism about having a very authoritative voice and sounding very smug from the Tartar advocates, but it's like, I would describe this film the exact same way to a much more degree. It's very authoritative. They're lying to us, and that's a fact. And then the smugness comes through, with the foul language and claiming that you have to be a fucking idiot to believe something. So that's my 2 cents on all that.
Yeah, it was very childish. Before I kind of move on to positives, Wooden, I had a question. I have a question specifically for both of you, but Wooden first. Do you feel that anything in this film has kind of disputed or challenged the arguments we've raised in our sort of videos that we've put out on the Tartarian hypothesis, or in videos like that you've made like a fair assessment and some of your older stuff? Do you feel that these guys have put forward any kind of counter arguments, not to us specifically, but just, have they countered the counter arguments?
They certainly brought up a lot of stuff that we've already heard. And that's what I was thinking when I was watching the videos, because initially you and I, AEWAR, were going to do this video for the Mortarboard channel. And after watching that film, I just realized that I couldn't put that much effort forward into trying to break down an hour and 30-minute video, because it was all repeating stuff that we have already talked about. We have tons of videos that cover many of these topics. The one that I found kind of the most entertaining, I found 2 moments really entertaining. One was when they showed the panoramic of San Francisco, and then they zoomed in and said, well, there's the building of the crown jewels from the expositions, which were many years after that photo was taken. And then when it showed it, it was just so blurry. It's like, how can you so confidently say that that's what it is? You just zoomed into one picture and we're like, here's a little blur. There it is. That was the only thing that was the first time me hearing. Now, I will share a screen with this because I found this just pretty entertaining. So this is a screenshot from the movie, and it actually throws into question one of my lunch breaks videos, because he has this segment on the St. Louis, Louisiana Purchase Exposition. And in his video, he's going on about this 1803 and how it's impossible. This date's here. The mainstream can't explain this one away. And this is why they tore down the buildings. But in this very screenshot from the movie, you can see that there's actually multiple dates. There's 1903, which represents when the fair was being built and when it was going to open. And then 1803, which is celebrating the exposition. So I just found it highly amusing that just from showing an image from this video, you can throw into question one of the presenters from the video, their own past work.
Yeah, and that's a great example of cherry picking in one still shot, is that you've got 2 options there. And of course, you're going with the other option that supports your argument, and you're not giving people the full picture, literally, in that example. Dusty, the question I had for you was, you're a Christian man. What about the absence of Christianity in this film, Dusty, and its history? Because the thing is, with the Tartarian hypothesis, there's many different renditions and iterations. So some of them do actually incorporate Christianity. We've got that kind of hypothesis about the millennial kingdom that's already been and gone.
For me, it wasn't a big kicker, the absence of Christianity or any kind of faith, benevolent faith. I respect all benevolent faiths, but I try to distinguish. I look at history from a different angle, as I say, through the lens of my faith, but it's not an overarching component that I need to have in any video for it to be legitimate or illegitimate from my angle. So to answer your question directly, it wasn't too much of a big deal for me. I know another component, as you said, of the old world research is the millennial reign, which is interesting for sure. Definitely could be unpacked a little bit more. but that didn't make or break it for me as far as the absence of Christianity. It wasn't like a theme that I needed to be in there or addressed for me to take it seriously or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I just think, I imagine again, the type of viewer that would be coming to this, because Stew Peters, again, with the white ethno-nationalism, but also with the kind of Christian patriotism. So a lot of his viewers are going to be Christians, white Christians. And I suppose a film like this that's saying all his story is a lie, they would probably be thinking, well, hang on a minute, what about the Bible when it's the history recorded there? And then I suppose all of church history. And the film didn't really try and make a case that that could be all fake. So I suppose in a way, I mean, again, I don't know if you can access things like, if we have access to things like people reviewing this film other than us going forward, but it'd be good to see what some of Stew Peters' fan base actually thought of it. Because I can't imagine that they're going to be like, yeah, this is the one, if they're a kind of Christian American patriot. Anyway, I think one thing I would like to touch on is what was positive about the film. What I'll do is I'll just say, in my opinion, and again, I don't want to sound like a douchebag, because I'm not actually trying to be a douchebag, but I genuinely struggle to think of a real positive with this film. You know, I found it a very tiring watch. You know, it was repetitive, it wasn't engaging, it certainly wasn't convincing. And it's material that we all know that's like 7 years old. And we've heard it all before from more talented content creators. So it kind of did make me think about what was the point of the film. And, you know, it's that 101. Though I suppose for me, the one positive, in a sense, is that some of these topics in the film potentially do carry a bit of weight. So, it's not to be completely contrary to, or contrary, if you, whatever. Basically, I'm not trying to go against the topics in this film and all of them. You know, there are some that are worth looking at. I'm sure that a lot of these fires were inside jobs, that there are conspiracies there, that they were deliberate, a lot of them. And I'm sure that, with the incubator babies and the orphans, I'm sure that there was a lot of dodgy trafficking that went on there. And, if you've watched my stuff, you know that I think there's a lot of mysteries with Christianity and the cathedrals and stuff like that. So I think, I guess a positive would be that it gave people a good choice of things to look into. And that's really the only thing I've got in terms of positivity. And I really don't think it's that much of a positive, because I feel that there's a risk there of people being turned off from all of those topics that could have actually been quite rewarding if you go down that route. What about you guys? Is there any positives in this film? Anything that it did well?
I'll lead out with that and state the obvious here. Maybe if I took it away from Woody, I'm sorry. But in general, just to get people interested in history is, I would say, a good thing. Whether or not, we're being critical of this documentary and its shortcomings, considering the alternative history research that we do. But to be a layperson, quote unquote, watching it, being cold, not knowing what's going on, we've kind of extrapolated that they may be very confused. And in that, maybe they would delve a little bit deeper into history if they have that as an interest in what they do. So to be critical from the high ground, maybe it will get more people back interested in history in general.
I would say a positive for me is it felt like closure. And this will make a lot of individuals happy, I'm sure. I am absolutely done with the topic. I'm done listening to it. I'm done bringing up other information that can be presented to those cases. Just all around, that was the nail in the coffin for me. Anyone who wants to believe in this topic, you have my 100% support. Do you? But yeah, it was just, there's no way after watching an hour and 30 minutes with that presentation that I would ever watch another video on YouTube or TikTok, no matter how ridiculous it is, of this conspiracy.
I do agree that there was a sense of closure. There was also kind of a sense of exhaustion from me. By the time I finished it, just like, I am kind of done with this. I'm ready to move on. Yeah. In terms of closure, and I do actually want to just ask the question, is this the end for the Tartaria conspiracy theory. But before I do that, the one thing that I did want to point out is the absence of the word Tartaria in the film. And Dusty mentioned this earlier, that maybe it comes up once. And actually, it's to the point where Hibbeler actually shows that sort of infamous, or now infamous, CIA document, which talks about Russia kind of erasing and whitewashing a big portion of Muslim Tatar history. But where he highlights in yellow that, history has been fabricated, he actually doesn't highlight the word Tartary or Tartaria. He deliberately leaves that out. And for me, it was really interesting because we were kind of seeing a rendition of this hypothesis. We've been with this for so many years now, and we're so used to people saying Tartaria, Tartaria, Tartaria. But there was a deliberate attempt to avoid it here and kind of make it apolitical. The use of the word Tartary or Tartaria in our kind of current geopolitical climate, as we see, a more and more aggressive Russian imperialism, and we're seeing China eye up Taiwan and becoming stronger and stronger by the day. And we're seeing Iran align with those two. That triangulation, Russia, China, and the Middle East, you could call that Tartaria. It's called BRICS. But when you look at the old maps, that vast portion of the world was once known as Tartary or Tartaria. And it does look like a union between these three entities, Russia, China, and the Middle East. So when you kind of look back at the West, Europe, and America, and you're reclassifying all Western achievement and architecture as Tartarian, that is, in my opinion, a political assertion, and you can't get around that. That's what you're doing. But this film was deliberately trying to avoid that. And in some ways, I actually appreciate that. That might be my positive. This film kind of did it for what it is. It took the hypothesis for what it is, and that's Ancient Aliens. It's another rendition of Ancient Aliens. It's kind of sloppy sci-fi. And the film was kind of, overtly okay with that. It didn't try and push the politics. So in that sense, I kind of, that's my positive, actually, now I've thought about it and said that. But on the other hand, it kind of trivializes, American history and achievement by saying it was all sort of extraterrestrial giants. But what was your take on that? Are we seeing, just to come back to that question of the end of Tartaria and closure, are we seeing the end now? Does this film mark the end where truthers and content creators are going to leave that word behind? They're going to leave that kind of political element of it behind, and they're going to pursue these topics in a different way. Does it have a future?
I think it could be the beginning of the end for what we're calling alternative history directly to Tartaria, because what you just outlined, and I'll mushroom off of that a little bit, and it makes you think of like the whole Yuri Bezmenov thing and dumbing down the society. And geopolitically speaking, there's kind of a square off here going, and what will be better just to get your opponent, their populace, to be so confused. I'm paraphrasing maybe some CIA guy or whatever. It's like, we'll know that our job is done when the American public doesn't know which way is up or down or left. I forget who said it. And in terms of it coming from the East and the square off, it's like they don't need to send Lenin on a train anymore. It's like they got to send a data package. And, was that done with the original OGs from that area? Was that their intention? Makes you think of it a little bit. But in that, maybe that crew and Hibbeler and Stu, again, being positive, but maybe they sussed that out. And they're like, hey, look at what we're doing here. We're like doing erasure of our culture, of what we did. And maybe they're not in agreement with that. And I could applaud that, right? Being the documentary as it was, a little bit of a hodgepodge cherry pick, but maybe the essence is, maybe they sussed that out, that like, hey, there's an element that's trying to undermine, number one, our history, that we built these, and considering BRICS and the square off geopolitically, that's not a good thing overall from a 100,000-foot view. So maybe they sussed that out, and they're staying away from it. So I could say maybe it is the beginning of the end. Hopefully it's the beginning of the end for directly equating alternative history research with Tartaria.
I would suspect it lives on for a while, at least in some fringe groups. But yeah, I wouldn't predict that the Tartaria label disappears overnight. It definitely has shown signs over the last, maybe a few years of kind of being chiseled away. But I would just, bring up the topic of giants in history, because when you do that hard erasing of history, you actually lose out on a lot of what you could use as evidence to talk about giants. Case in point, with the largest pyramid down in Mexico, I believe is Cholula, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. In Aztec mythology, that was built by giants. Same with the Native Americans. They have tons and tons of stories of giants in a previous age that were here. You don't hear about the Native Americans talking about how the giants built the Capitol buildings and the Native Americans were living in the Capitol buildings. Now, I'm sure a white conspiracy theorist would just come out and say, well, the Native Americans don't know their history either. But if you don't talk to these individuals, you're not in a position to say that, because they have faced a hard genocide, and yet they still manage to hold on to thousands of year-old traditions. And we know this because the North American natives that have these traditions, we see it down south in South America. They share very similar traditions. There was clearly, at one point here in North and South America, trade routes, community of individuals. I'm sure they also were warring and all that good jazz. But even within their stories, they talk about giants and building certain pieces of architecture that are here. But none of that was brought up in the movie. It's just this idea, well, hey, see these pictures from the Chicago fire? Those were probably giants that built that, even though we see regular sized bricks, regular sized stones. And most importantly, we see the ironwork facades that are still standing on those buildings. And then at the very end, there was just, well, let's throw mud fossils in really quick, and let's show you those images of the mountains, and let's turn them at an angle, and look, you can see a giant face. How does that fit in to giants building this type of architecture? Because now you're way too big. A giant's face the size of a mountain built these buildings in Chicago, that doesn't even come close to adding up in terms of scale. So, yeah.
That was confusing to me too, because Michelle was talking about the melted mountains, and she, if I quoting correctly, said that some mountains are melted buildings, and then it went right into that segment that you were talking about, giant faces on the mountains. So are they melted buildings, or are they petrified giants? That was confusing to me on its face. No pun intended.
Yeah, that was hilarious. That was the moment in the movie, the only moment in which I laughed. We went through melted buildings, and then the mud fossil stuff, and there was a bit where an image of a mountain just slowly rotated. And it was just, it looked like a massive Native American or something just fossilized. But you're right, is that if you're being serious with that, like, these were very big people. Like, they're not going to be building any Capitol buildings. There's no way. And that kind of comes back to your point, Dusty, of what is Hibbeler doing with this film? Is it parody? More astute viewers of my stuff, Lost History of Flat Earth, they ask, is it a parody? And there are elements, I do like a bit of parody. So is that what Hibbeler's doing? Is he actually kind of going in undercover as a bit of a hero and wrestling this topic away from the Russia, China, Middle Eastern, Tartarian aggressors, that are sort of aiming their rifles and guns at the West? And is he wrestling that topic away and saying, no, you're not doing this. We're going to take this theme and we're going to make it absurd and turn it into a bit of a joke because it's gone too far? And in that sense, he would almost be like an anti-hero in my eyes. It's okay, I understand the chess you're playing here. Otherwise, I can't understand why mud fossils came in at the end there. If it wasn't to make the whole thing look even more ridiculous, I don't know.
Yeah, like I said, that was a confusing point for me, and nothing against Michelle Gibson, but it stuck out for me specifically because it was directly addressed that mountains are melted buildings, the old Jerry DeCamp, but then they went into the faces. So, I do believe that there were giants in this realm or at one point in time, not that big though. It says it in the Bible. There were giants on the earth in that time. Were they Nephilim, the progeny of the fallen angels? There's definitely some gravy there. But again, to underline and to highlight this confusing point for me in the film was that it was cited that mountains could be melted buildings, and then it went right into showing pictures of them possibly having faces on them. So which one is it? Then again, I'm not opposed to them being possibly, some of them being giant trees from back in the day, but giants that size, highly doubt it, in my opinion. Mountains as melted buildings, I don't think so. So, and then again, to your point about, are they wrestling that narrative away from them? In that, I can give them credit and credence for that if they're doing that, because there is that element of the squaring off. And to cite the dude that you brought me on to, AEWAR, that Alexander Dugan guy, I'll say this on this podcast: if the West was a person, that dude would slit its throat and piss on it while it's bleeding out, drinking his vodka. And that's very dangerous if you want to keep your culture and your nation solid. So just be wary of that. Like I said earlier, and I'll underline it again, they don't need to send Lenin on the train. They could just send a data package. So was that the Tartaria op? Who knows? But if they were sussing that out and trying to wrench it back, in that I can give them credit.
Well, and Stu Peters has interviewed that Russian guy you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he has, yeah.
Well, there you go. And in case anyone's wondering, that is Stu Peters as my logo image there. Yeah, there's nothing new at all when it comes to stories of resets that involve cataclysm and giants. You can go back into a lot of different religions, a lot of different nations, and you hear that story. So all I'm seeing with this movie is taking an already existing idea, trying to find something original to do with it, to grift it. And what they've done here is they've just said, well, let's rehash this story, but let's fit it into this mud flood narrative, and let's go ahead and wipe out the mud flood, remove that. And you actually kind of needed the mud flood, I think, in this, now that I think about it, because you don't explain really what the reset was. So yeah, nothing new under the sun, but they found a way to try to make it their own.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think, at the end of the day, for me, if we were to do the film critic thing, if this is Empire Magazine or IMDb or whatever, and I was to give this film a score, I would probably say like a 3 out of 10. That would be mine. However, if Hibbeler is playing a bit of chess, then I might bump it up to a 5 out of 10 and take my hat off to him. Otherwise, nothing new under the sun, like Wooden said.
I'll add it onto that to do a critic thing, and professionally troll one of the dudes I watch. Speaking of Russian vids, he's always calling everybody a Mason. Woody, your picture that you have, if RV Truth seen that, you'd be obviously this guy's a Mason, clearly. But with that, and to add some humor here, I'll level hard on a 3.3 out of 10.
Yeah, I'll join you guys and give it a 3 out of 10. Look, at the end of the day, making movies, it ain't easy. Even just putting YouTube videos together, it's not easy. So credit where credit's due. You put the effort forward. You produce content, you produced art, and that deserves applause. Obviously, the subject matter doesn't work for me. In the beginning, I did think it was innocent, and the more you are and I, and you as well, Dusty, have looked into it, the innocence is starting to feel lost, and it does seem like there's an agenda behind it. And then you get Focus, the white rapper turned white nationalist, involved in Goldco, and it's just starting to stink more and more each day.
Yeah, and I think that's a wrap. And just before we do close, I do actually have a direct question for Hibbeler. And you haven't got to make a public statement or anything like that. You can just hit me up in the DMs on Twitter or something. But those janitors that you used in the film, the security guard and the janitor, they were your friends, right? They weren't real, were they? They were your mates in costume. You don't, like I said, you don't have to do a public statement. You just hit me up in the DMs.